The jungle of Varus 7 was nothing like Earth. Taman had learned that the hard way over the past 3 days. Strange purple vines hung from massive trees that seemed to touch the clouds. The air smelled sweet but also wrong, like fruit mixed with metal. Every sound made him jump. Every shadow could be something dangerous. His shuttle had crashed into this nightmare and now he was alone. The communication system was broken. The emergency beacon was dead. All he had was his survey equipment, some food packets, and a plasma cutter that was meant for cutting rocks, not fighting monsters. Taman knelt beside a small stream, filling his water containers. The water here was safe to drink after filtering, at least according to his scanner. That was one good thing in this mess. He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked up at the 2 suns setting in the orange sky. Another night was coming. Another night of strange noises and fear. Then he heard the scream. It was high-pitched and terrified, clearly a voice in pain. Taman froze. Every survival instinct told him to stay hidden, stay quiet, stay safe. But the scream came again, and this time he heard something else. A deep, wet growling sound that made his blood turn cold. He grabbed his equipment belt and ran toward the sound. His boots crashed through the thick undergrowth. Branches scratched his face. He didn't care. Someone needed help. Taman burst into a clearing near a ravine that glowed with strange blue light. What he saw made him stop breathing. A girl was pressed against the rocks, but she wasn't human. Her skin was pale blue with patterns that shimmered like oil on water. Her eyes were huge and amber-colored, filled with terror. She wore simple clothing made from some kind of woven plant material. Purple blood ran down her arm from a deep wound. Between Taman and the girl was the beast. It was massive, easily the size of a small car. 6 legs, each ending in claws that dug into the rock. Its body was covered in black scales that seemed to absorb light. The head was all teeth and hunger. Saliva dripped from its mouth, and where the drops hit the ground, the plants hissed and died. Acid. The beast hadn't noticed Taman yet. It was focused on the girl, moving slowly forward, enjoying her fear. Taman's hands shook as he pulled out his flare gun. It was designed for signaling rescue ships, not fighting. He had 3 shots. The plasma cutter could work, but he would need to get close. Very close, the girl saw him. Her strange eyes went wide. She made a sound, something between a gasp and a word in a language he didn't know. The beast's head snapped toward Taman. For a moment, everything was still. Then the beast roared and charged. Taman fired the flare gun. The bright red projectile hit the beast's face and exploded in brilliant light. The creature screamed and stumbled, shaking its head. Taman didn't waste time. He ran forward, pulling the plasma cutter from his belt. The beast recovered faster than he expected. One massive claw swept toward him. Taman dove and rolled, feeling the wind as the claw passed inches above his head. He came up running, heading for the girl. "Move!" he shouted, knowing she probably couldn't understand, but hoping the meaning was clear. She didn't move. She was hurt, scared, frozen. The beast charged again. Taman put himself between the creature and the girl. He activated the plasma cutter. The small blue blade hummed to life. It was meant for cutting through rock samples, maybe 6 inches of cutting power. Against this monster, it looked like a toothpick. The beast's claw came down. Taman dodged left and slashed with the cutter. The blade bit into the beast's leg, cutting through scale and flesh. The creature howled and pulled back. Black blood sprayed across the rocks, but there were 5 more legs. Another claw hit Taman's side and he felt his ribs crack. Pain exploded through his body. He hit the ground hard, the plasma cutter flying from his hand. The beast loomed over him, opening its mouth wide. Acid dripped onto Taman's leg, burning through his pants. He screamed. Through the pain, Taman saw his equipment belt. The power cells for his geological scanner. They weren't designed to be weapons, but power cells could be unstable if damaged. The beast's head came down, jaws wide enough to swallow him whole. Taman grabbed a power cell, thumbed the emergency release to make it overload, and threw it into the beast's mouth. Then he rolled. The explosion wasn't huge, but inside the beast's mouth it was enough. The creature's head snapped back. It made a choking, gurgling sound. Smoke poured from its mouth and nostrils. It stumbled backward, shaking its head violently. Taman forced himself to stand. Every breath felt like knives in his chest. He grabbed the plasma cutter and another power cell. The beast was hurt but not dead. It turned back toward him, more angry than ever. "Come on," Taman whispered. His vision was getting blurry. "Come on." The beast charged one last time. Taman waited until it was close, so close he could smell the acid and death on its breath. Then he threw the second power cell, damaged and overloading, right at the beast's feet and dove toward the girl. The explosion was bigger this time. The beast screamed. Taman covered the girl's body with his own as rocks and dirt rained down. Heat washed over them. His back burned. When the noise stopped, Taman looked up. The beast was on its side, 2 of its legs blown off. Black blood pooled around it. The creature's breath was shallow and wet. Taman grabbed the plasma cutter and approached carefully. With the last of his strength, he drove the blade into the beast's skull. It twitched once and went still. Taman dropped to his knees. The pain was overwhelming. He looked down and saw blood, his own red blood mixed with the purple blood from the girl. Everything was spinning. The girl was saying something. Her voice sounded far away. She was crying, pulling at his arm. Taman saw her face above him. Those strange amber eyes filled with tears and something else. Gratitude maybe, or wonder. "It's okay," he managed to say. "You're safe." He didn't know if she understood. Probably not. But he needed to say it anyway. The last thing Taman saw before darkness took him was the girl pressing something soft and glowing against his wounds. Her hands moved quickly, purposefully. She was trying to help him. She was trying to save him just as he had saved her. Then everything went black. When consciousness tried to return, it came in pieces. Taman felt himself being dragged across rough ground. The girl was stronger than she looked. He heard her voice speaking in that musical language, urgent and determined. He felt rain on his face, or maybe it was her tears. He couldn't tell. The darkness came back and swallowed him again. Time passed in a blur of pain and strange dreams. Sometimes he felt gentle hands changing his bandages. Sometimes he heard that musical voice singing softly. Sometimes he smelled something sweet and herbal like medicine. Through it all, one thought kept him alive. He had saved her. Whatever happened now, whatever this strange planet had in store for him, he had done that one good thing.
He had saved an innocent life.
In the end, maybe that was what being human meant. Not the technology or the science or the exploration, just the simple choice to help someone in need, no matter how different they were, no matter the cost. Taman let that thought carry him through the darkness, not knowing that his simple act of courage would change everything. For him, and for an entire civilization that had never met anyone like him before. The morning of the second day after the beast attack, Taman and Nari began their journey. Taman's ribs still hurt with every breath, but the glowing moss bandages had done their work. He could move, and that was enough. Nari had drawn a map in the dirt showing where the special flowers grew. It was far, maybe 2 days of walking through dangerous territory. The flowers only bloomed in places where certain minerals were in the soil, near water that flowed from deep underground. Taman had an idea. He pulled out his geological scanner, the one he had been using to survey the planet before his crash. He showed Nari the device and tried to explain. The scanner could detect minerals in the ground. If he knew what minerals the flowers needed, he could find them faster. Nari didn't fully understand the technology, but she understood the goal. She led him to a dead flower she had found days before, its petals dried and brown. Taman scanned it carefully, analyzing its cellular structure and the trace minerals in its tissues. Perfect. The flower needed a specific combination of elements, rare but detectable. Taman programmed the scanner to search for that signature. Now they had a guide. They set out into the jungle with renewed purpose. Nari led the way, her knowledge of safe paths invaluable. She could read the jungle in ways Taman never could, knowing which areas held predators and which were safe. Taman followed, scanner in hand, adjusting their direction whenever he detected a stronger mineral signature. The jungle fought them at every step. Thick vines blocked their path. Strange insects swarmed around them, though Nari knew which ones were harmless and which would bite. Once they had to cross a river where the water glowed green and moved with unusual currents. Nari found a fallen tree that served as a bridge. As they walked, they continued teaching each other words. Taman learned that danger was Kreth and safe was Sola. Sky was Vela and ground was Terror. Simple words, but they built a vocabulary. Nari in turn learned Korean words from Taman. She liked the sound of them, the way they felt in her mouth. When she successfully said friend in Korean, Taman grinned and she smiled back, proud of herself. During their rest periods, they shared more about their worlds. Taman told her about Earth, trying to explain concepts like cities with millions of people, vehicles that moved without animals, and lights that worked without fire. Nari listened with wide eyes, sometimes looking skeptical, sometimes amazed. She told him about her people, the Velthir. They lived in the great trees, building homes from living wood. They hunted and gathered, living in harmony with the jungle. Her tribe numbered maybe 300 people, spread across several villages. To her, that was a huge number. When Taman tried to explain that Earth had billions of humans, she couldn't comprehend it. Billion? She asked in her language, trying to understand. Taman picked up stones and made piles, showing her counting. 1, 10, 100,000. He ran out of stones, trying to show million. Nari laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and shook her head. Too many. Impossible. On the afternoon of their first day traveling, they encountered their first real danger since the beast. Taman's scanner beeped a warning, detecting movement in the trees above. He grabbed Nari's arm and pointed up. Creatures moved through the branches, four-legged things with long tails and too many teeth. They were smaller than the beast that had attacked Nari, but there were at least 6 of them. They circled overhead, clearly curious about the strange travelers below. Nari pulled out a knife made from sharpened stone. Taman powered up his plasma cutter. They stood back to back, watching the creatures. One of the creatures dropped down, landing 10 feet in front of them. It sniffed the air and made a clicking sound. The others answered from above. Taman's mind raced. Fighting 6 of these things would be suicide, but maybe they didn't need to fight. He remembered something from his training about animal behavior. Most predators avoided things they didn't understand, things that seemed dangerous. He pulled out his emergency beacon. It was broken for long-range communication, but it could still make noise. He activated it and pointed it at the creature. The beacon screamed, a high-pitched wailing sound designed to attract rescue ships from orbit. The creature jerked back, ears flattening against its head. Taman waved the beacon around, making the sound echo through the jungle. The creatures scattered, climbing higher into the trees and disappearing into the dense foliage. The danger passed. Nari stared at Taman with something like awe. She touched the beacon carefully and Taman turned it off. She said something in her language and he caught the word for magic. Not magic, he said, shaking his head. Technology. Science. He didn't know if she understood the difference, but she seemed impressed either way. They camped that night in a hollow at the base of a massive tree. Nari built a small fire while Taman checked the scanner. The mineral signature was getting stronger. They were close. As they ate, a mixture of Taman's ration bars and fruits Nari had gathered, she began to talk more seriously. Taman caught words he knew and pieced together the meaning. She was worried about going home. Her father was the chief, a man named Hanbin. He was strong and protective, but also traditional and suspicious of anything new. Her people had legends about beings from the sky, but they were mostly stories of demons and tricksters. Nari looked at Taman and touched his face gently, tracing his features. Different. Strange. How would her people react to him? Taman understood her fear. First contact situations were always delicate, and he wasn't an ambassador or a diplomat. He was just a surveyor who had crashed and gotten involved in something way beyond his training. But there was a child dying. Nari's brother. She had finally made clear through drawings and gestures. A boy named Do-hyun, younger than her, sick with something their medicine couldn't cure. Only the special flower could save him. Taman took Nari's hand and squeezed it. Whatever happened with her tribe, they would face it together. First, they had to get the flower. Everything else could wait. The next morning, Taman's scanner led them to a grove hidden deep in the jungle. The ground here was covered in a thin mist, and the air smelled sweet and sharp at the same time. And there, growing in clusters around stones that glowed faintly with internal light, were the flowers. They were beautiful, each one the size of Taman's hand, with petals that shifted colors from blue to purple to silver. They pulsed gently with bioluminescence like tiny beating hearts. Nari made a sound of joy and moved forward. Taman grabbed her arm and stopped her. His scanner was detecting something else. Movement, heat signatures. Something lived here. Something big that was territorial about these flowers. A creature emerged from the mist. It was different from the beast or the tree creatures. This one walked on 4 legs but stood as tall as Taman. Its body was covered in scales that looked like crystals, and its eyes glowed the same color as the flowers. It didn't look aggressive, but it positioned itself between them and the flowers, clearly guarding them. Nari reached for her knife. Taman stopped her and shook his head. He had an idea. Most territorial animals weren't trying to kill intruders, just scare them away, and this creature seemed almost protective of the flowers, not hungry. Taman opened his scanner and changed its settings. Instead of detecting minerals, he made it emit a specific sound frequency, one designed to be calming to most carbon-based life forms. It was supposed to work on stressed livestock back on Earth. Maybe it would work here. The scanner hummed, a low and steady tone. The crystal creature's head tilted, its glowing eyes dimmed slightly, and its aggressive stance relaxed. It made a sound, something between a purr and a rumble. Taman walked forward slowly, keeping the scanner active. The creature watched him but didn't attack. He reached the flowers and carefully picked several, leaving most of them intact. The creature watched but seemed to understand he wasn't destroying the grove. Nari joined him, moving just as carefully. Together, they gathered enough flowers to save Doyun, wrapping them in large leaves to protect them. As they backed away, the creature settled down among the flowers, still watching but calm. They had succeeded without violence, without destruction. Nari looked at Taman with undisguised wonder. Her people would have killed the guardian creature. That was their way, the way of survival. But Taman had found another path. As they began the journey back toward Nari's village, the flowers safely packed, Taman felt the weight of what was coming. Soon he would meet an alien civilization. Soon they would have to explain everything. Soon Chief Hanbin would have to decide what to do about the strange sky being his daughter had brought home. Taman touched the flowers gently. They had what they needed to save Do-hyun. That had to count for something. That had to be enough to bridge the gap between their peoples. At least he hoped it would be. On the third day after Taman had saved her from the beast, Nari led him to the edge of her tribe's territory. The jungle had changed here, becoming more organized. Trees had been deliberately shaped, their branches forming natural pathways. Vines were tied in specific patterns that probably meant something to the Velthir. Nari had grown quiet and nervous. She kept looking at Taman, then away, her fingers twisting together. She was afraid, and that made Taman afraid too. They reached a marker, a tall stone carved with symbols. Nari stopped and put her hand on Taman's chest over his heart. She spoke seriously in her language, and though he didn't understand every word, he caught the important ones: trust, safe, together. Then she cupped her hands around her mouth and made a series of calls, complex patterns of sound that echoed through the trees. She was announcing their arrival. The response was immediate. More calls came back, and these sounded alarmed. Taman heard movement in the trees above, quick and purposeful. Within minutes they were surrounded. Velthir warriors dropped from the trees, at least 10 of them. They were taller than Nari, their skin darker blue, their bodies marked with scars and paint. They carried spears with stone tips and bows with arrows that looked sharp enough to pierce armor. Every weapon pointed at Taman. The warriors shouted questions at Nari, their voices harsh and demanding. She answered quickly, stepping between Taman and the spears. She showed them the flowers, still wrapped carefully in their leaf package. The warriors looked at the flowers, then at Taman, then back at Nari with confusion and anger. One warrior, scarred and imposing, gestured sharply with his spear. The message was clear: move. They were being escorted to the village, and it wasn't a friendly invitation. Taman kept his hands visible and away from his equipment belt. He made no sudden moves. These warriors were scared of him, and scared people with weapons were dangerous. They walked for another hour, surrounded by guards. Finally, the village appeared, and it took Taman's breath away. The Velthir built their homes inside and around massive trees, each one hundreds of feet tall. Platforms and bridges connected the structures, creating a three-dimensional city in the canopy. Hundreds of Velthir stopped their activities to stare at the strange procession. Children pointed and hid behind their parents. Elders emerged from their homes to watch. The warriors led them to the largest platform at the base of the biggest tree. A crowd had already gathered, their voices rising in a mix of fear and curiosity. The warriors formed a circle around Taman, spears ready. Then the crowd parted and Chief Hanbin appeared. He was massive, at least 7 feet tall, with shoulders like a bull. His skin was a deep navy blue, covered in ceremonial scars that showed his rank. His eyes were the same amber as Nari's, but harder, filled with authority and suspicion. He wore a cloak made from the hide of some great beast and a headdress of feathers and bone. Beside him walked an older female, smaller but no less commanding. Her skin was pale, almost white, and her eyes seemed to see through everything. She carried a staff wrapped in vines and glowing moss. This had to be Yuna, the spiritual leader Nari had mentioned. Hanbin's voice boomed across the platform. He demanded answers from Nari, and she responded, speaking quickly and gesturing at Taman, at the flowers, at everything. The chief's face grew darker with every word. He looked at Taman, and the disgust and fear were obvious. Hanbin spoke, and even without understanding the words, Taman heard the accusation. Demon, monster, danger. Nari argued back, her voice rising. She unwrapped the flowers and held them up. She pointed at a small figure being carried onto the platform, a young boy who looked barely conscious. Dohyun, her brother. The boy was dying. Even from a distance, Taman could see it. His skin had lost its color, turned grayish. His breathing was shallow. He couldn't weigh more than 60 pounds. Hanbin saw the flowers and his expression changed, just for a moment, hope breaking through the anger. But then he looked back at Taman and the hardness returned. Yuna stepped forward. She approached Taman slowly, her staff tapping against the platform. The warriors tensed but didn't stop her. She walked around him, studying him from every angle. She reached out and touched his face, his hair, his hands. Her expression was unreadable. She spoke to Hanbin, her voice calm and measured. The chief shook his head violently and responded with sharp words. An argument broke out between them, with other elders joining in. The whole village seemed to be debating what to do with Taman. A warrior named Jiho, younger but fierce, stepped forward. He pointed his spear at Taman and issued what sounded like a challenge. He wanted to fight, to prove that Taman was dangerous or weak or both. Taman understood the test. In many cultures, warriors proved themselves through combat, but fighting would be the worst thing he could do. If he won, he would humiliate them. If he lost, they might kill him. Either way, violence would poison any chance of peace. Taman shook his head and took a step back, hands raised in a peaceful gesture. He spoke in Korean, knowing they wouldn't understand the words but hoping his tone would convey meaning. I don't want to fight. I mean no harm. I only want to help. Jiho looked insulted by the refusal. He moved closer, spear raised. Other warriors started shouting, some encouraging the fight, others calling for caution. Nari threw herself between Taman and Jiho, screaming at the warrior. Her father roared at her to move aside, but she refused. In the chaos, little Dohyun made a sound weak and pained. Everyone froze. The boy was getting worse, fading right in front of them. Yuna moved quickly. She took the flowers from Nari and knelt beside Dohyun. She began working immediately, crushing the petals and mixing them with water from a gourd, creating a glowing paste. She spoke words that sounded like prayers or spells as she worked. She applied the paste to Dohyun's chest and made him drink some of the mixture. The boy coughed weakly but swallowed. Everyone watched in breathless silence. Hanbin looked torn between his sick son and the strange creature his daughter had brought. Finally, he made a decision. He barked orders at the warriors. They grabbed Taman's arms, not gently, and began pulling him away. Taman didn't resist. He looked back at Nari, whose face was streaming with tears. He tried to smile at her to show her it was okay. She had the flowers. Dohyun would be saved. That was what mattered. They took him to a cage built into one of the trees, a prison made from thick wooden bars. They pushed him inside and locked it. The cage was small, barely big enough to stand in. Guards positioned themselves around it, spears ready. From his cage, Taman could see the main platform. He watched as Yuna continued to treat Dohyun. He watched as Nari argued with her father, gesturing wildly, tears falling. He watched as the sun set and night came and the village slowly quieted. Alone in the darkness, Taman touched his equipment belt. He could probably cut through the bars with his plasma cutter. He could probably escape into the jungle. But what would that accomplish? It would only confirm their fears that he was dangerous. Now he had to trust that reason would win. He had to trust that saving Dohyun would matter. He had to trust Nari. He curled up on the floor of the cage, his ribs aching from the day's stress. Tomorrow the Velthir would decide his fate. Tomorrow he would learn if compassion and courage were enough to bridge the gap between species. Tomorrow everything would change. As Taman drifted into uneasy sleep, he thought about Earth, about his family who probably thought he was dead, about his mission that had gone so wrong. He thought about Nari and her trust in him. He thought about a little boy fighting for his life. And he thought that maybe, just maybe, humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or weapons or knowledge. Maybe it was simply the willingness to help others even when it cost everything, even when the outcome was uncertain. That thought gave him peace as darkness claimed him once more. Dawn came to the Velthir village with the sounds of celebration. Taman woke stiff and cold in his cage. confused by the joyful voices echoing through the trees. He pulled himself up and looked out through the bars. The village was alive with activity. Velthir were hugging each other, laughing, dancing on the platforms. Children ran between the adults, playing games and making happy sounds. Something good had happened. A guard approached the cage, and this time his expression wasn't hostile, just cautious. He brought water and food, simple bread made from ground roots and some kind of fruit. Taman ate gratefully, still wondering what had changed. His answer came an hour later when Yuna arrived, accompanied by several elders. The old healer looked tired but satisfied. She studied Taman through the bars for a long moment, then spoke to the guards. They hesitated, looking at each other, but finally unlocked the cage. Taman stepped out carefully, hands visible, making no threatening moves. Yuna gestured for him to follow her. The guards came too, spears ready but not pointed at him anymore. They walked through the village, and Taman saw Velthir stopping to watch him. But the fear in their eyes had changed to something else. Curiosity, wonder. Some of them even bowed their heads slightly as he passed. Yuna led him to a large structure built into the trunk of the central tree. Inside, the space was filled with herbs, tools, and what looked like medical supplies. Doyun lay on a sleeping mat, and beside him sat Nari. The change in the boy was remarkable. His skin had color again, a healthy blue. His breathing was deep and steady. He was awake, propped up on cushions, looking weak but alive. Very much alive. When Dohyun saw Taman, his eyes went wide. He said something to Nari, who smiled through tears and responded. The boy stared at Taman with open fascination. Nari stood and crossed to Taman. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. Taman heard her sobbing against his shoulder, felt her shaking. He hugged her back, relief flooding through him. "He's okay," Taman said softly. "Your brother is okay." Nari pulled back and nodded, understanding the emotion if not the words. She took his hand and led him to Dohyun's bedside. The boy reached out with a thin hand, touching Taman's face with wonder. He spoke in a weak voice, asking questions. Nari answered, explaining. Tamin caught his own name several times and words he knew. Brave, saved, flowers, friend. Yuna had been watching all of this silently. Now she spoke, her voice commanding attention. She had something in her hands, Taman's equipment that had been taken from him. She examined each item carefully. The scanner, the plasma cutter, the emergency beacon, his ration packs, his medical supplies. She held up the medical kit and opened it, showing the others the bandages, antiseptic pain medication. She spoke at length, and though Taman couldn't understand all the words, he recognized the tone. She was explaining, teaching, showing them that these weren't weapons but tools. Yuna demonstrated the scanner, waving it over different objects and watching the display. The other elders leaned in, fascinated. She held up a ration pack and broke off a piece, tasting it carefully. Her expression showed surprise and approval. Then Yuna did something unexpected. She activated Taman's holographic mapper, the one he used for surveying. A three-dimensional image of Varus 7 appeared in the air, spinning slowly, showing continents and oceans and mountain ranges. The Velthir in the room gasped. Some backed away in fear, but Yuna held up her hand for calm. She studied the image, then pointed at a specific area on the map. She looked at Taman questioningly. Taman understood. He adjusted the map, zooming in on their location. The village appeared as a small marker in the vast jungle. He pointed at it, then at the ground, showing them, "This is where we are." Understanding dawned on their faces. This wasn't magic or demons. This was knowledge, information presented in a way they had never imagined possible. Yuna spoke to the elders, her voice firm. She pointed at Taman, at his equipment, at Dohyun recovering on the bed. She was making an argument, and from the slow nodding of the elders, she was winning. The group left, taking Taman with them. They emerged onto the main platform where a large gathering had formed. The entire tribe seemed to be there, hundreds of Velthir watching and waiting. Chief Hanbin stood at the center, and in his arms he held Dohyun, wrapped in a blanket. The boy was weak but awake, and the sight of him alive made the crowd murmur with joy and relief. Hanbin's face was different from yesterday. The anger was gone, replaced by something complex. Confusion, gratitude, shame, and something that might have been respect. Yuna spoke to the assembled tribe, her voice carrying across the platform. She told them everything, the story of what had happened. Taman heard his name, heard Nari's name, heard words he recognized. Beast, flowers, danger, saved. She showed them Taman's equipment, demonstrating each piece. She explained that these were tools of knowledge, not weapons of evil. She spoke about the medicine that had helped heal both Nari and Taman, about the food that could be preserved, about the device that showed the whole world at once. Then Yuna said something that made the crowd go silent. She used a word Taman had heard in Nari's stories, Velkor, guardian. She was calling him a guardian from the sky, the one from their old legends who would come in times of need. Hanbin stepped forward, still holding his son. He looked at Taman for a long moment. Then he spoke, his deep voice filled with emotion. Nari moved to stand beside Taman and translated in whispers, using the words they had taught each other. You saved my daughter when you could have hidden, Hanbin said. You were wounded, but you still helped her. You fought beside her to find medicine for a child you never met. You surrendered to us when you could have fought. You let us imprison you when you could have escaped. Hanbin's voice cracked. I was afraid of what you are. I let fear make me cruel. I almost made the greatest mistake of my life. The chief approached Taman slowly. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone watching, Hanbin removed his ceremonial headdress. In Velthir culture, Nari had explained, the headdress represented power and authority. To remove it was to humble yourself completely. Hanbin knelt before Taman, his son still in his arms. You are not a demon, he said. You are the truest warrior I have ever known. You have shown us that courage is not about fighting, but about protecting. That strength is not about power, but about sacrifice. One by one, the tribal elders knelt. Yuna knelt, her old bones creaking. Jiho, the warrior who had challenged Taman, knelt with his head bowed in shame. Nari knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her face. Then the entire tribe knelt, hundreds of Veltir bowing to the strange being from the sky who had shown them a different way. Taman felt overwhelmed. He hadn't done anything special, just what any decent person would do. He moved quickly to Hanbin and gently helped the chief stand. Please, he said in Korean, then in the Velthir words he had learned, please stand. I am not above you. I'm not a god or a guardian. I am just a person like you. Nari translated, and Hanbin studied Taman's face. Slowly, a smile broke across the chief's stern features. He placed a hand on Taman's shoulder and spoke again. Then we are honored to call you friend, Nari translated, and we pledge to help you as you have helped us. Over the next hours, everything changed. The Velthir brought Taman to his shuttle's crash site. Warriors and craftsmen examined it with Taman's guidance. He explained what was broken, what he needed. They might not understand the technology, but they understood tools and materials. The tribe had resources, strong vines for cables, resin that could seal metal, crystal formations that might conduct energy. Working together, they could repair the communication system. It would take time, but it was possible. That evening, the tribe held a feast in Taman's honor. They roasted meat and prepared their finest foods. Children who had been afraid of him now climbed on him, touching his hair and laughing at his jokes even though they couldn't understand the words. Do-hyun, still weak but recovering, sat beside Taman. The boy had made something, a small carving from wood. It was crude but heartfelt, showing two figures holding hands, one human and one Veltir. He pressed it into Taman's hand and spoke seriously. He says you are his brother now, Nari translated, sitting on Taman's other side. In our culture, that is the highest honor. You are family. Taman looked at the carving, at the boy's hopeful face, at Nari's grateful smile, at the tribe celebrating around them. He thought about how scared he had been 3 days ago, alone and injured in a hostile jungle. He thought about the moment he heard Nari scream and made the choice to help. That choice had changed everything. Not just for him, but for an entire civilization that had now seen that strangers didn't have to be enemies, that different didn't have to mean dangerous, that the unknown could bring gifts instead of threats. Tell him, Taman said to Nari, that I'm honored to be his brother. And tell your father that I will share everything I can with your people, not to change you but to help you thrive. Medical knowledge, food preservation, whatever you want to learn. Nari translated, and Hanbin nodded with deep approval. The chief stood and raised his cup, making a toast. The tribe echoed his words, voices rising in unity. Later, as the celebration continued, Taman stood at the edge of the platform looking up at the stars. Earth was out there somewhere, impossibly far away. His people had no idea what he had found here, what he had learned. Nari joined him, following his gaze to the stars. "You're home?" she asked in Korean, the words still awkward on her tongue. "Yes," Taemin replied. "But this feels like home too now." She smiled and took his hand. "You gave us hope," she said, mixing Velthir and Korean words. "You showed us sky people are not demons. You showed us that reaching out is better than hiding. You changed everything." Taemin squeezed her hand. "You saved my life first. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You taught me your language and your ways. We changed each other." As they stood there together, watching the stars and listening to the celebration behind them, Taemin understood something fundamental about humanity's place in the universe. They weren't meant to be conquerors or rulers. They were meant to be bridges, connecting different peoples, sharing knowledge and compassion, proving that intelligence and kindness could go hand in hand. One human had met one alien in a moment of danger. From that single act of courage, a friendship had grown between species. And from that friendship, who knew what might grow? Peace, maybe. Understanding. A future where different peoples worked together instead of fighting. Taemin had come to Varus 7 as a surveyor, looking for minerals and resources. He had found something infinitely more valuable. Proof that kindness was universal, that bravery transcended species, and that a single good choice could echo across worlds. As the celebration continued into the night and the two moons of Varus 7 rose over the jungle, Taemin made a silent promise. When rescue came, when he finally returned to Earth, he would tell this story. He would make sure humanity understood the lesson the Velthir had taught him. The universe was vast and full of different peoples, but beneath the surface differences, the things that mattered, courage, compassion, family, love, these were universal, and that knowledge was worth more than all the minerals in the galaxy. Hanbin's voice cracked. "I was afraid of what you are. I let fear make me cruel. I almost made the greatest mistake of my life." The chief approached Taemin slowly. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone watching, Hanbin removed his ceremonial headdress. In Velthir culture, Nari had explained, the headdress represented power and authority. To remove it was to humble yourself completely. Hanbin knelt before Taemin, his son still in his arms. "You are not a demon," he said. "You are the truest warrior I have ever known. You have shown us that courage is not about fighting, but about protecting. That strength is not about power, but about sacrifice." One by one, the tribal elders knelt. Yuna knelt, her old bones creaking. Jiho, the warrior who had challenged Taemin, knelt with his head bowed in shame. Nari knelt beside her father, tears streaming down her face. Then the entire tribe knelt, hundreds of Velthir bowing to the strange being from the sky who had shown them a different way. Taemin felt overwhelmed. He hadn't done anything special, just what any decent person would do. He moved quickly to Hanbin and gently helped the chief stand. "Please," he said in Korean, then in the Velthir words he had learned, "Please stand. I am not above you. I'm not a god or a guardian. I am just a person like you." Nari translated, and Hanbin studied Taemin's face. Slowly, a smile broke across the chief's stern features. He placed a hand on Taemin's shoulder and spoke again. "Then we are honored to call you friend," Nari translated. "And we pledge to help you as you have helped us." Over the next hours, everything changed. The Velthir brought Taemin to his shuttle's crash site. Warriors and craftsmen examined it with Taemin's guidance. He explained what was broken, what he needed. They might not understand the technology, but they understood tools and materials. The tribe had resources: strong vines for cables, resin that could seal metal, crystal formations that might conduct energy. Working together, they could repair the communication system. It would take time, but it was possible. That evening, the tribe held a feast in Taemin's honor. They roasted meat and prepared their finest foods. Children who had been afraid of him now climbed on him, touching his hair and laughing at his jokes even though they couldn't understand the words. Do-hyun, still weak but recovering, sat beside Taemin. The boy had made something, a small carving from wood. It was crude but heartfelt, showing two figures holding hands, one human and one Velthir. He pressed it into Taemin's hand and spoke seriously. "He says you are his brother now," Nari translated, sitting on Taemin's other side. "In our culture, that is the highest honor. You are family." Taemin looked at the carving, at the boy's hopeful face, at Nari's grateful smile, at the tribe celebrating around them. He thought about how scared he had been 3 days ago, alone and injured in a hostile jungle. He thought about the moment he heard Nari scream and made the choice to help. That choice had changed everything. Not just for him, but for an entire civilization that had now seen that strangers didn't have to be enemies, that different didn't have to mean dangerous, that the unknown could bring gifts instead of threats. "Tell him," Taman said to Nari, "that I'm honored to be his brother. And tell your father that I will share everything I can with your people, not to change you but to help you thrive. Medical knowledge, food preservation, whatever you want to learn." Nari translated and Hanbin nodded with deep approval. The chief stood and raised his cup, making a toast. The tribe echoed his words, voices rising in unity. Later, as the celebration continued, Taman stood at the edge of the platform looking up at the stars. Earth was out there somewhere, impossibly far away. His people had no idea what he had found here, what he had learned. Nari joined him, following his gaze to the stars. "You're home?" she asked in Korean, the word still awkward on her tongue. "Yes," Taman replied, "but this feels like home too now." She smiled and took his hand. "You gave us hope," she said, mixing Velthir and Korean words. "You showed us sky people are not demons. You showed us that reaching out is better than hiding. You changed everything." Taman squeezed her hand. "You saved my life first. You trusted me when you had no reason to. You taught me your language and your ways. We changed each other." As they stood there together, watching the stars and listening to the celebration behind them, Taman understood something fundamental about humanity's place in the universe. They weren't meant to be conquerors or rulers. They were meant to be bridges, connecting different peoples, sharing knowledge and compassion, proving that intelligence and kindness could go hand in hand. One human had met one alien in a moment of danger. From that single act of courage, a friendship had grown between species. And from that friendship, who knew what might grow? Peace, maybe. Understanding. A future where different peoples worked together instead of fighting. Taman had come to Varus 7 as a surveyor, looking for minerals and resources. He had found something infinitely more valuable. Proof that kindness was universal, that bravery transcended species, and that a single good choice could echo across worlds. As the celebration continued into the night and the two moons of Varus 7 rose over the jungle, Taman made a silent promise. When rescue came, when he finally returned to Earth, he would tell this story. He would make sure humanity understood the lesson the Velthir had taught him. The universe was vast and full of different peoples, but beneath the surface differences, the things that mattered, courage, compassion, family, love, these were universal, and that knowledge was worth more than all the minerals in the galaxy. Taman woke to soft blue light and the smell of flowers. His whole body ached, but the sharp pain in his ribs had dulled to a constant throb. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. A gentle hand pressed against his chest, pushing him back down. "Easy," a voice said. The word was in that strange musical language, but the meaning was clear. Taman's eyes focused. The blue girl was sitting beside him, concern written on her alien features. They were in some kind of cave, but not a dark one. The walls glowed with soft bioluminescent moss that provided steady light. His wounds were wrapped in more of the glowing moss, and he could feel a cool, tingling sensation where it touched his skin. The girl saw him looking at the bandages and touched her own arm where she had been wounded. Her injury was also wrapped. She pointed at him, then at herself, then made a gesture that seemed to mean same or together. Taman nodded slowly. "You took care of me," he said. She tilted her head at the unfamiliar words. Then she smiled. It was a surprisingly human gesture, and it made Taman relax a little. If she could smile, maybe they could figure this out. The girl reached beside her and picked up a leaf wrapped around something. She opened it carefully, revealing a paste made from crushed plants. She pointed at his bandages, then at the paste, then made a mixing motion with her hands. "Medicine," Taman said. "You made medicine." She repeated his word, or tried to. "Medicine." The pronunciation was off, but she was trying. Over the next few hours, they developed a simple system. The girl would point at things and say words. Taman would repeat them and then give the English or Korean words in return. She seemed fascinated by the differences. Her name, as far as Taman could tell, was Nari. She pointed at herself and said it clearly several times until he got it right. When he told her his name, she struggled with the sounds but eventually managed something close enough. Water was K in her language. Food was Mel. The glowing moss was Lumi, which made sense. Taman found himself picking up the words quickly. They were simple and logical. When his stomach growled, Nari's eyes widened with understanding. She pulled out a small package from Taman's equipment belt, one of his ration bars. She held it up questioningly. Taman nodded and opened it for her. The ration bar was a compressed mix of proteins and carbohydrates, designed to keep a surveyor going for hours. It didn't taste like much, but it was food. He broke it in half and offered her a piece. Nari took it carefully, sniffed it, and then took a tiny bite. Her eyes went huge. She looked at the ration bar like it was magic, then at Taman, then back at the bar. She said something rapid in her language that sounded like questions. Taman tried to explain using gestures. He pointed at the bar, then made a mixing motion, then pointed at his mouth. Food made from many things. Preserved. She seemed to understand the concept even if the execution amazed her. In return, Nari showed him local plants that were safe to eat. She took him to the cave entrance, supporting his weight as he limped. Outside, the jungle was less scary in daylight, though still very alien. Nari pointed out fruits that looked like purple eggs and roots that smelled like cinnamon. She showed him which water sources were clean and which ones would make him sick. They spent the whole day like this, teaching each other, learning each other. Taman found that Nari was smart and curious. She wanted to understand everything about him. She touched his hair, which was straight and black, so different from her own, which seemed to be more like fine threads of silver. She examined his hands, comparing them to her own four-fingered ones. When Taman activated his scanner to check the edibility of a plant, Nari jumped back in fear. The device beeped and displayed information on its small screen. To her, it must have seemed like magic or evil spirits. Taman moved slowly, showing her that it wasn't dangerous. He scanned her hand and showed her the readout. Temperature, basic biological data, nothing harmful. She leaned in close, fascinated, fear turning to wonder. As the second sun began to set, they returned to the cave. Taman was exhausted from the movement, and his ribs ached terribly. Nari helped him sit down and checked his bandages. The glowing moss had done amazing work. The acid burns on his leg were healing, and his ribs, while still painful, felt more stable. That night, sitting by a small fire Nari had built, they tried to really communicate. Using the dirt floor of the cave as a canvas, Taman drew pictures. He drew Earth round and blue. He drew buildings and cities. He drew his shuttle and showed how it had fallen from the sky. Nari watched with absolute attention. When he finished, she took a stick and began drawing too. She drew what looked like a village in the trees. She drew people like her, lots of them. Then she drew a small figure separate from the others with an X next to it. She pointed at herself. Taman understood. She had been alone, away from her people. Nari drew more. She drew a flower with many petals glowing like the moss. She pointed at it urgently, then drew a small figure lying down, clearly sick. She touched the flower, then the sick figure, and made a healing gesture. Someone was sick. Someone needed the flower. That's why she had been out here alone. Taman pointed at her, then at the drawing of the village, then made a questioning gesture. Why didn't she go back? Nari's face fell. She drew the beast that had attacked her, then drew more of them between her and the flower. She couldn't get the flower alone. Without it, whoever was sick would die. She looked at Taman with those huge amber eyes, and he saw the question there even without words. Would he help her? Taman's ribs screamed at him. His leg was barely healed. He had his own problems, his own mission to get back to his shuttle and call for rescue. The smart thing would be to stay here, recover, and worry about himself. But when he looked at Nari's face, at the hope and desperation there, he knew what his answer had to be. He nodded. The relief that washed over Nari's face was worth every ache in his body. She grabbed his hands and pressed them to her forehead, saying something in her language that sounded like a prayer or a thank you. Tears ran down her blue cheeks. Taman squeezed her hands gently. "We'll find it," he said, even though she couldn't understand the words. "I promise." That night, as Nari slept curled up near the fire and Taman lay awake staring at the glowing cave ceiling, he thought about how strange life was. 3 days ago, he had been alone and scared, just trying to survive. Now he had a friend from another world, and he had made a promise to help save someone he had never met. His commander back on Earth would have said he was being foolish. Regulation said to avoid contact with unknown species, to prioritize survival and rescue, to not get involved in local affairs. But Taman had never been good at following regulations when they didn't make sense. And right now, the only thing that made sense was helping Nari. She had saved his life after he saved hers. That created a bond, something deeper than words or species. He looked at her sleeping form, peaceful in the firelight. She trusted him completely. That trust was precious and rare, and he wouldn't betray it. Tomorrow they would begin their search for the flower. It would be dangerous. They might not survive, but they would try together. Taman smiled in the darkness. Maybe this was what humanity was meant for. Not conquering the stars or building empires, but reaching out across the impossible distances between different kinds of people and finding common ground. Finding friendship. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him, dreaming of glowing flowers and a sick child he had never met but would risk everything to save.